Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this preparatory meeting towards the 2022 meeting of the Malaga Global Coalition for Municipal Finance. It is a great pleasure for me as Secretary General of United Cities and Local Governments to welcome you all, but in particular our dear friends and co-souls of this endeavor of the Malaga Coalition, the United Nations Capital Development Fund, whom, as you know, is the institution within the United Nations that is trying to foster investment for the poor, both public and private. And that's why they understand cities just as well as we do in United Cities and Local Governments, and why they are putting on the good fight to increase the financing that cities and territories around the world are getting to actually achieve the development goals. And that is the very reason why we, together with UNCDF and of course with the Global Fund for Cities and Development and the City of Malaga, we built this alliance in 2018 with the ambition to develop common positions and strategies to reshape the new global finance ecosystem. A global finance ecosystem that we were convinced already in 2018 that couldn't work well, that needed renewal, and now we are more convinced than ever during this pandemic crisis that we have been facing globally. Many of the issues that we have been discussing together since 2018 have become even more apparent. And this is why we're very excited, looking forward to meeting in person in Malaga next year, but preparing the road, preparing the ground to get there. And we welcome you to this preparatory meeting that is starting now. I am very, very happy to have with us Preeti Singha, the Executive Secretary of UNCDF. She was appointed earlier this year. It is a privilege for us to have you with us. You are a seasoned and very well experienced investment and development banker with a 30-year track record associated with raising and managing institutional public and private development capital. And above all, we know as new leader of UNCDF, a very important partner for us, for cities and territories around the world. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, mayors, Secretary General, Emilia Saiz. Thank you so much for those warm words and the warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here representing UNCDF and my colleagues David Jackson and the whole team behind all of this. So distinguished speakers, friends and colleagues. Let me share a few words as a start to this preparatory meeting, and I hope we'll have a wonderful discussion today. So as you know, it's a great honor and pleasure for me and privilege to be here and to work with you on municipal finance under the Malaga Global Coalition and to co-open this event alongside you, Secretary General of the UCLG. Thank you all for joining today and your continued support for the Malaga Coalition. As we all know, the Malaga Coalition was created in 2018 when UNCDF and UCLG and partners got together voicing the challenge of municipal finance, which is fundamental to the SDGs and to the survival and the benefit and the growth of humanity and how people live in cities and municipalities and in the urban structures, and also very important for our planet. The current global financial framework is not fit for purpose when it comes to providing local governments with adequate access to financing for local projects, fostering the required transformational socioeconomic, environment, and cultural changes that we would all like to see. The Malaga Coalition was therefore then created with the ambition of developing common positions and strategies to break through these obstacles and to reshape a new global financial ecosystem that enables local governments to deliver on the global agenda. It is not coincidental, it was necessary and it was urgent that local solutions became part of the global response to the wider sustainable development challenges, and that municipal finance became central to addressing these issues, particularly in the developing country. And on a personal note as well, I've spent half of my life in the developing world and half in the developed. And I really, really believe in the importance of urbanization, well-planned urbanization, the planning, the importance of cities, and how humans and the whole planet can live better when we come together to design better cities and infrastructure, and municipal and local financing, obviously, to support that. Now, looking back from 2021, when the world was still in the pandemic, the Malaga Coalition demonstrated its advocacy for the important roles of local government and municipal finance. And I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues have contributed to this, and we're all very passionately behind this agenda. During the past year, we have seen cities at the forefront of the response to pandemic and how effective and essential they have been for the emergency preparedness and response. However, local governments have been grappling with the contracted fiscal space, the decline in economic activity and revenue. Meanwhile, there has been increased demand on expenditures. It is more important to hear from local and regional government representatives today how to sustain municipal finance for economic recovery and continue progressing on the global development agendas instead of regressing due to the pandemic. We all have to fight the pandemic together and keep moving forward on the development path. With the first two convenings of the Malaga Coalition, we have agreed on the narrative necessary for the paradigm shift towards a financial ecosystem for municipalities to achieve the SDGs. We have identified the policy reforms and innovations required to unlock finance for cities. I think all of this has been very important work. We have also set up the International Municipal Investment Fund here at UNCDF, a financial instrument for the Malaga Coalition uniquely designed to leverage public resources and attract large pools of towards local transformative investments of developing countries. Building on the outcome of the last two convenings of the coalition and the current context, UNCDF and UCLG developed and circulated a draft roadmap with three broad policy areas in order to accelerate the localization of financing for public service and capital infrastructure in the post-COVID recovery. So this draft roadmap has three main points we would like to highlight: increase capital flows for public infrastructure and transformative financeable investments at the local level. Long-term institutional infrastructure finance must be directed to local government-led transformative investments. Policy, legal, and institutional prerequisites must be put in place to create an ecosystem of financial partners that can support each other and work to secure the financing needed for these transformative local investments. Second, build effective partnerships for financing and managing local infrastructure assets. Stable local revenue streams and strong government engagement are key prerequisites for successful partnerships with public and private investors at the local level to finance infrastructure assets and secure funding for their maintenance and operation. Thirdly, build or rebuild actually local fiscal space. As local fiscal space has been severely impacted by COVID-19 pandemic, it is instrumental to enhance local government's capacity to generate own source revenues and to secure stable revenue streams through intergovernmental fiscal transfers in order, again, to foster that sustainable economic development and facilitate the emergence of a virtuous cycle of investments at the local level. As we are preparing for the third Malaga convening in 2022, it is critical to listen to cities and to get your perspectives, particularly in this year of perhaps reduced local fiscal space, which will impact the urban development agenda significantly. We are looking forward to the gathering today and to gathering the information from the first preparatory meeting today as inputs into the second preparatory meeting in October this year to be organized by UNCDF and our partners, including governments and development finance institutions. The outcome of the second preparatory meeting will be a final proposed roadmap for the global financial ecosystem that works for cities and local governments to be validated and approved at the third convening in 2022. My colleagues from our local development finance team, whom you know well, will be present throughout this preparatory meeting to collect your input, suggestions, and proposals, and will use that to refine this global policy roadmap. Questions we are asking include: how are cities doing in the aftermath of COVID-19? How serious is their fiscal crisis? What measures are being taken? How has this impacted the investment agenda? Is central government supportive? What policy agenda and type of financing meets the demand? Is this financing available? And if not, why not? In closing, let me reiterate my pleasure and support to collaborate with our partners on this important agenda for municipal finance. I look forward to a fruitful dialogue and a continued partnership with insightful outcomes from today. Thank you so much for your attention, and hand it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Executive Secretary. You have covered a lot of our ambition, the vision that we share about the need to enhance financing, and you have touched upon some of the questions that we are now facing in what you have described as a post-pandemic environment. The reality is that in a very big part of the world, we are still very much in a pandemic. And the feeling that we have as network of local and regional governments, as global network, is that we might not know yet how big the reach of this pandemic is and the consequences that we will need to face. I would like to share with you some of the findings that we have been looking at within the context of the Emergency Governance Initiative, a research initiative that we are developing with the London School of Economics and our section Metropolis. But I am delighted to see that we already have with us the Mayor of Málaga. Alcalde, bienvenido a esta reunión. Como decía al comienzo, estamos deseando estar con usted en Málaga de nuevo. Pero es un gusto recibirle aquí hoy, que esté con nosotros y que comparta un poco en sus propias palabras cómo ha vivido este año tan especial y cómo ve nuestro trabajo dentro de la coalición de Málaga. Alcalde, si está listo, le dejo a usted la palabra. No le oímos, alcalde. Algo ahí con su sonido. A ver.
Sí, que es un placer estar con vosotros. Recién llegado de un encuentro que tenía en Sevilla, pero llegó a tiempo de poder oír las últimas palabras de Pretisina, a quien saludo con todo afecto, igualmente a ti, Emilia, como secretaria general de Gobiernos Locales Unidos, Coalición Global. Y por supuesto que es muy interesante esta reflexión que hacemos en el día de hoy, que estáis haciendo, ¿no? Y muy oportuno, porque en este contexto de la crisis que el COVID-19 ha producido en todo el mundo, los ayuntamientos una vez más hemos demostrado que somos la administración más cercana a la gente y por tanto la que los ciudadanos esperan respuesta, ¿no? Sin desconocer que hay unos niveles, central, gobiernos, regionales, donde existe la administración regional que tiene su papel también, ¿no? Pero en el plano social sobre todo, en el plano también de la reactivación, cómo poder actuar para reactivar lo mejor posible la economía, se espera mucho de los ayuntamientos y hemos estado a la altura del reto, a pesar de que muchas veces en muchos países los ayuntamientos no tienen las competencias y los presupuestos necesarios para hacer frente a estos retos, ¿no? Por seguir existiendo estructuras muy centralizadas o a nivel nacional o a niveles regionales, ¿no? En Málaga, la ciudad de Málaga, hemos notado los problemas de tener que movilizar más recursos, en torno a 50, 70 millones de euros entre inversiones y sobre todo actuaciones sociales, donde más hemos estado atentos, como es natural, a las necesidades de alimentos inclusive, o de poder ayudar en materia de las personas sin hogar, en cuanto a también ofrecer un espacio seguro de salud a las personas con problemas económicos en materia de alquiler de viviendas para que puedan mantener sus alquileres, subvencionando los alquileres, y hemos tenido que reforzar las tradicionales líneas de apoyo que veníamos haciendo. Y luego hemos tenido también que hacer actuaciones en materia de salud, como desinfección de espacios públicos, o sea, lo que es simplemente limpieza de la ciudad se ha ido convirtiendo durante los meses de la crisis en limpieza y además desinfección, con equipos especializados, incorporando líquidos especiales, los propios mecanismos de las empresas nuestras municipales de limpieza, ¿no? Así es como se ha ido desarrollando. Y luego hemos desarrollado foros de participación ciudadana. Es muy importante la participación de la gente cuando hay crisis. Aunque ha habido una etapa en que lo presencial había perdido en fin, posibilidades a favor de lo digital, pero que la gente pueda opinar, aportar ideas, para hacer las cosas lo mejor posible en materia de salud, en materia de cohesión social y en materia de reactivación económica. Foros sobre innovación, sobre turismo, sobre comercio, sobre todas las actividades, transporte, etcétera, construcción, donde pudiéramos ir más deprisa, mejor, evidentemente ligado al tema de salud, ¿no? Entonces, los problemas y las reflexiones que hemos hecho en las reuniones del año 18 y 19 en Málaga, de cara al 22, van a estar, como diríamos, enriquecidas, podría decir la palabra, ¿no?, por la experiencia del 20 y del 21, que es la que estamos viendo ahora, ¿no? Y conclusiones muy claras de la necesidad de que haya recursos del ámbito público, público-privado y privado, etcétera, en cantidad y mecanismo suficiente para poder trabajar en las respuestas que el planeta necesita y donde las ciudades, en una era que tiene que ser ciudades sostenibles, en el plano ambiental, en el plano social, en el plano económico, tienen que estar a la altura de ese reto, ¿no? Los objetivos de desarrollo sostenibles tenemos que alcanzarlo entre todos y las ciudades tienen un papel muy importante ahí, ¿no? Entonces, tener esta mentalidad, digamos, esta sensibilidad y esta preocupación de cómo sumar los recursos desde el ámbito de Naciones Unidas, desde el ámbito de las grandes actuaciones supranacionales como la Unión Europea, organizaciones parecidas, aunque con menos, digamos, estructura organizada, pero también existe en el plano continente americano, continente asiático, etcétera, continente africano también, los países, las naciones, los niveles regionales, los niveles locales, el mundo empresarial, en fin, al final individual, todo el mundo tiene que estar un poco sensibilizado en esa materia y el papel municipal siempre queda muy claro, como el que yo, como alcalde, soy un enamorado del papel que corresponde a los ayuntamientos, esencial en la vida pública, en la vida administrativa, en el contacto con la sociedad civil, ¿no? Una democracia es más auténtica, permitidme que hable así, mientras más descentralizada sea. Más fácil es hacer la transparencia adecuada y la transparencia con eficacia desde el ámbito local que desde el ámbito regional o del ámbito nacional. Más fácil es hacer la participación y eso enriquece la democracia, ¿no? En definitiva, queridos amigos, creo que esta crisis nos recuerda la necesidad de ir avanzando en ese papel que Naciones Unidas y toda la estructura deben de estimular, que haya más descentralización local y sobre todo una capacidad de financiación adecuada en los ámbitos locales y es tarea que corresponde a todas las administraciones y también al sistema financiero, de alguna forma, estar trabajando en esa dirección, ¿no? De modo que estaremos encantados de que en los primeros meses del año 22 podamos recibir aquí en Málaga para poder hablar de todo esto presencialmente y tener, en definitiva, una nueva reunión de la coalición de Málaga. Estamos encantados que el nombre de Málaga esté unido a la coalición que pretende ir resolviendo y ayudando a que las finanzas municipales estén a la altura de los retos que tenemos los ayuntamientos ahora y más todavía de cara al 2030.
Pues muchísimas gracias, alcalde de la Torre, alcalde de Málaga, por estas palabras. Me gusta mucho este pensamiento de que las conversaciones que hemos tenido en el 2018 y en el 2019 van a estar enriquecidas y yo creo que casi que con una lupa, ¿no? Con lo que hemos aprendido durante esta pandemia. Le agradecemos mucho y estamos deseando seguir esta conversación en Málaga. Until then, let us look at the discussions that we have been having on localizing finance and what we have been learning during these past months. We all knew that service provision, and in particular local service provision, needed to have a different space in the international discussion, also in the national agendas. But this pandemic, and as the mayor was saying, has made it extremely clear, public is back. We have been relying on public service provision. When we were locked at home, the world continued going. We could still get water from our taps. We still had electricity. We still had public transportation because the local service providers were still working. And if this public is back, we will need to think how we are going to be able to finance this public service provision that has suffered from a cut in income and an increase in expenditure. what we have learned from surveys and conversations that we have had from our membership is that there have been many new services that have had to be developed to attend to those first difficult moments of the pandemic. And we have noticed that the local service provision has been very related also to the health of the local and of the national economies. You cannot detach the health of the local economies from that of the national governments. That the emergency has amplified long-standing problems that we knew we had. We have insufficient budgets at local level around the world. And the executive secretary of UNCDF was saying that this is also very much the case in the global south, but we have seen also that the global north is suffering. We have noted that some of the local governments that had more independent access to revenues are suffering more than those that are dependent from national fiscal transfers, and we will need to look into what that entails and how we can overcome the gap that is being created. We have also noticed that local governments have a very big responsibility in financing policy sectors, which are very dependent on emergencies and very affected by emergencies. And I think this is part of the thinking that we within the Malaga coalition will need to continue. That conversation will become extremely relevant. We have also noticed that beyond the lack of finances, so beyond the budgetary limitations that we have, there is a lot of red tape that local and regional governments need to go through that actually make it very difficult for them to implement measures very quickly as they would need in an emergency like this. We have noticed that the income has decreased everywhere in the world and that the expenditure has increased everywhere in the world, and that the losses of the of those members of United Cities and local governments that are placed in countries that are more developed are even, of course, proportionally bigger because of the amount of service provision that they have been giving during the high time of the emergency. So these are some of the challenges that we will need to consider and to take into account in the equation of the recovery. We are going to have the opportunity today to listen to the experiences of cities, but also the experiences of associations of local and regional governments. This is a part that I attach a lot of importance to, because at the end of the day, local and regional government associations have been playing a very critical role in negotiating the space for our membership in the recovery plan. So I really look forward to hearing about that. And we're going to start with the first roundtable, 1 year into the outbreak. What are the financial challenges and priorities? So you will have the opportunity to hear from representatives of cities around the world around some of the topics that I have covered in my brief remarks. And I am delighted to have with us a dear colleague, previously at the World Secretariat and now as Program Manager of FMDB, of the Global Fund for Cities Development, Luc Aldon. Luc, we are in your hands. Thank you for being with us. It's good to see you.
Hola, Emilia. Thank you. Colleagues, can you all hear me?
Yes, Luc, we can hear you.
Thank you, Mathilde. I'm asking because as the Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyer, I seem to be having some difficulties with connection with the video and sound. So if there is any please help me in moderating this first table. With that first technological comments, good afternoon to all. Good afternoon, colleagues from UCLG, colleagues from UNCDF, and from FMDV. I'm very happy to be opening this first table connecting from Uganda. In our first roundtable, we will be welcoming Monsieur Paul Simondon, Deputy Mayor for Finance of the City of Paris, but also representing the co-presidency of the Global Fund for Cities Development, together with the District of Abidjan. Madame Manuela Aristani, Deputy Mayor from Tirana, Madame Yvonne Akisoyo, Mayor of Freetown, and Madame Mayor, I hope your technical issues are being solved. And Mr. Anibal Gavidia, President of Cities Alliance. Colleagues, my role here is to be hosting a dynamic discussion. I will be asking you the 3 questions that were sent in the concept notes and making sure that we have a vivid debate and catching, as Emilia just said, what are your challenges and your main priorities that you want to be see carried forward in the road to Malaga next year? First of all, how would you describe the impact of your finances? What has been done in your city or in your region? How was the access to financing or to funding for the emergency response? To open this discussion, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Paul Simondon, if you are connected, Deputy Mayor.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, everybody. I'm very pleased to be.
Hi, good afternoon. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks for having me. Je vais parler en français. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci beaucoup d'être là et de nous permettre d'avoir cet échange sur un enjeu aussi important que les conséquences financières de la crise et de ce que ces conséquences nous apprennent sur le rôle des pouvoirs locaux et leur autonomie dans la transition de notre économie. Les conséquences de la crise financière pour une ville comme Paris, pour donner quelques ordres de grandeur, bien sûr, you can hear the bell of the Paris Town Hall. Yeah. Les conséquences donc de cette crise pour une ville comme Paris, pour donner les ordres de grandeur, le budget annuel est de 10 milliards d'euros environ. Les conséquences sont majeures. Ce sont d'abord des conséquences en perte de recettes. Pour l'année 2020 uniquement, on est à près de 550 millions d'euros de perte de recettes. Pourquoi ? Parce que les structures des recettes d'une ville comme Paris sont vraiment très portées sur un dynamisme économique, sur une économie internationale, de tourisme international, de culture, d'événementiel, qui bien sûr est tombé beaucoup plus que dans des villes de taille moyenne en France, par exemple. Donc c'est à la fois des taxes sur le dynamisme de l'immobilier, ça va être également les taxes de séjour sur les nuits d'hôtel, ça va être enfin l'absence des recettes habituelles sur des équipements municipaux payants du type l'accueil des enfants en crèche, des équipements sportifs, le stationnement dans les rues, des activités qui d'habitude engendrent des recettes et qui là n'ont pas pu le faire à cause des confinements sans que les coûts associés soient significativement diminués. Il y a eu également des dépenses de crise. Pour l'année 2020 uniquement, près de 250 millions d'euros, à la fois pour assurer les services à la population, donc bien sûr tout ce qui est protection des agents, des achats de masques, de gel hydroalcoolique, des frais de nettoyage, de désinfection des locaux, pour être sûr que, par exemple, la collecte et le traitement des ordures ménagères puissent continuer à se faire. Il y a aussi des dépenses d'ordre social très importantes pour une ville qui, comme Paris, a des compétences en termes de protection sociale et qui ont bien sûr beaucoup augmenté au fur et à mesure que de nombreuses personnes perdaient des emplois. Parmi le chiffre global sur lequel que nous avons annoncé est de l'ordre de 800 millions d'euros uniquement pour le coup pour l'année 2020. Et après un an de crise, on est au-delà d'1 milliard d'euros d'impact direct sur les finances de la ville de cette crise. Dans ce coût figure 200 millions d'euros qui est un plan de soutien, c'est-à-dire des dépenses volontaire, ce n'était pas totalement subi, mais c'était bien un acte volontaire de la part de la ville et de sa maire Anne Hidalgo pour soutenir l'économie locale, pour autoriser les cafés, les restaurants, très importants à Paris bien sûr, à s'installer avec des terrasses extérieures sans prélever de taxes sur le sujet, à venir aider les familles qui habituellement, grâce aux cantines des écoles, peuvent nourrir leurs enfants avec des prix très faibles pour les familles les plus pauvres. Et donc, nous avons débloqué une aide alimentaire exceptionnelle pour ces familles. Et enfin, des soutiens à de nombreux commerçants et entrepreneurs qui ne pouvaient plus payer de loyer dans la période. Et donc, cet impact global, le plan de soutien tel que nous l'avons dessiné était de l'ordre de 200 millions d'euros. Voilà. Ce ne sont que quelques chiffres, bien sûr, rien n'est comparable en fonction des compétences, en fonction des pays et des structures des économies, mais c'est pour vous donner quelques ordres de grandeur.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I don't see my colleague Luc, so I am going to take over briefly. I am afraid that he missed the connection. Luc, are you still with us? No? Let us then continue and see. Are you back, Luc?
I am, with a few seconds of delay. I'm so sorry, Emilia. Monsieur Simondon, thank you very much. And you actually launched a dynamic answering the 3 questions in some way, so that will give some space for some discussions among the panelists. Take the floor. Madam Mayor, are you with us?
I'm not sure we understood who you are inviting to take the floor since you were cut off. The Ugandan connection is being difficult today, Luke. So who were you expecting?
I was making sure the mayor of Freetown was also connected.
She is here. I can see her.
So, Madam Mayor, please have the floor.
Thank you, Luca. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here and to be talking about issues which are affecting us all. As Emilia pointed out, the Global South, and I believe the Executive Director highlighted the situation in the Global South, but Emilia pointed out that it really is a global issue, Global South, Global North, and the representative of Paris has just really reinforced that. The experience in Freetown has been different for a number of reasons. One thing which is worth pointing out, which from a health perspective has felt like a plus, but it's also shown the extent to which we are all intertwined and how the economic impacts are often more severe than the health impacts, or can be more severe. So Freetown has only just crossed the 2,500 mark for confirmed COVID cases since the outbreak started. So from the perspective of health, there's the numbers have been very low. The deaths have been minuscule in comparison to other countries and other cities. We've had 80 deaths nationwide. Now, that said, the economy has contracted because of the interdependency with other economies and the global supply chain and the fall in the price of commodities, which are our exports. And in Freetown, as a city, our main revenue source, similar to many cities, is our property rates. Now, we were in the bizarre situation where last year we were launching a new property rate system. It had been reformed. It was more equitable. It was more comprehensive. It was digital, but it was also blocked by the government. And the explanation initially given was that this was because of the COVID crisis. But then the government did not stop any of its own taxes. It did not give any, sort of compensations for its own taxes. Are you hearing me? Is the sound okay?
Yes, we are. It's
okay.
Perfect.
Okay. So we actually went for an entire year with pretty much no revenue. I mean, property rates account for 65% of our own source. So with that taken out, we were significantly below budget at a time where there was a crisis to deal with. We were providing quarantine, we were providing food to quarantine homes, we're providing masks to market women, we're providing water in communities. So the gap, we closed the gap by relying heavily on donor funding, but also we had, it was small, but it was significant. We also had a lot of philanthropy and private individuals, residents of the city, stepping forward to meet some of those needs. So by the end of the year, we had spent more than we would have spent in that budget. We had considerably more, but outside of our regular revenue sources. 1 year on and into the second year, we're experiencing our third wave. Again, the numbers are still small, but just as it felt like the economy was beginning to open up, there's this sense again of the global contraction, which is impacting on us. From the perspective of property rates, we were able to restart collection in February of this year. And to date, the deliveries happened, completed in about April. To date, we've collected about 16% of that revenue. So that's a fairly low compliance for halfway through the year. And the impact on our businesses is still being felt. We've just actually made a decision that in spite of the fact that we waived property rates since we couldn't collect it in 2020, we are going to offer a discount to all hotels, which will be again another burden. So the story remains the same. The fiscal space contracted. Very interesting that there's reference made to, will funding come from national or regional recovery funds? We're not in a position as a city where there's any recovery fund being spoken about by our government. So we're having to look to see how best to fill these gaps. And what we are doing is actually pushing property rates. So we are on a major campaign right now, building citizen buy-in, reminding everyone of the connection between service delivery and rate paying. And although we're at 16% now, we actually are quietly confident that by really pushing a sort of community, residents-led, residents-owned, and we've brought on some influencers, some brand ambassadors to help us pass this message on. We're really confident, quietly confident, that we will be able to get residents and businesses to meet their commitments so that we can continue to deliver services. So 1 year in, definitely I would say in conclusion, a major consideration, a major piece of this is the influence that central governments can have on that fiscal space, and the need for there to be a more, I would perhaps a more conscious response as cities to preventing this kind of vulnerability. I know it's easier said than done because these are often politically led, but that said, it's not something that can be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for these words. I think you have given a very first-hand, very illustrative first-hand example of what is going on in many cities around the world. And since there are many parts of the world where there are no actual recovery plans that are being looked at, we are very, very worried as a global network of what is going to be happening with local service provision. And this is why we think we need to put that in a different part of the discussion internationally. And taxation is a very big part of that, but awareness raising, of course, as you were saying, is also extremely relevant. Since our colleague in Uganda is still having challenges with connection, I am going to give the floor now to our special advisor on local finance in my own team, Serge Alau. Serge, can you carry on with the rest of the facilitation for this segment?
Thank you, Emilia. I'm sorry that from Uganda, it's a bit complicated to have a good connection. So I will proceed with Mayor Anuela Ristani. Same question, what was the impact of the crisis on the local finances, and what have you been doing to try and overcome the problems you faced? Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's been a roller coaster for all of us, and I think that it doesn't really matter which city you are running and which part of the world you're living in. Problems are as similar as they're different in terms of how we've been affected financially. Rightfully so. The first thing that cities sometimes miss when it comes at a time of crisis, at a time of restrictions, it's always the little players who suffer the most. And so I'm sure that this has been the case with other cities as well, where small businesses are the ones who actually get the first hit, whether it is in terms of their limited activity, whether it is in terms of the restrictions that affect them the most. And that has also been the case for Tirana. So far that since March 2020 and now to be extended until 2024, and we have zero local tax for all small businesses in this country, not just in the city, but all throughout the country. We have delayed the collection of property taxes for small businesses, and property tax is something that city collects, so it's a local tax. And then we have basically removed all tariffs, and my colleague from France was saying before, from public used spaces. So, if you have a small bar or a small cafe and you want to put those chairs outside, you don't pay rent to the city. You didn't pay rent to the city for the rest of 2020, since March when the pandemic hit in Tirana, and you didn't pay for the first half of 2021. So those facilities, especially for the small businesses, they obviously decrease the collection rate in terms of what we locally collect from businesses in Tirana, so from the revenues. But surprisingly, and surprisingly for some, but it wasn't just random on our side, all of the money that we were meant to collect from small businesses, we made it up with revamping our developing efforts in the city. So there's always a certain number of demand for development in the city, and there is always some sort of the pipe gets smaller and smaller just because of the volume and just because of all the requests that need to be processed. And so what we did was we increased the effort so that we would push more on the development and collect the tariffs from big business who develops in the city, and in order for that to make up for all the losses that we've had in the collection throughout this time. So strong was this effort that we basically made up the full budget that we were meant to collect for 2020, and we are on a good pace to do that for 2021 as well, which means something that I think it comes straightforward if you are in the politics of solidarity. And I think in times like this, like COVID, when we saw, yes, the public was the only one that never gave up. It just tells you that, yes, you have to charge big players a lot more than you charge small players. And this is such a universal truth that we see it in the cities, but I think we see it all throughout the world. It was the same thing with with the vaccinations. It was the same thing with all the countries making this effort. But no matter how big your backyard is, it's not just going to keep you safe forever if the world outside is crumbling. And so that same mindset has basically led the whole philosophy of us maintaining our finances in order. And when we're talking about recovery, in order to be able to provide public services, it's not necessarily that the public services are not going to be provided, whether they're recovered or they're crumbling, or whether they're hurting or they're still sick. You still need to bring water to people. You still need to clean the pipes. You still need to have those streets paved. You still need to collect the trash. Now, the level of how you do that determines the level of resilience of your city and determines the level of development for the city in the years to come. It's not that it's not going to happen, but if that is not done right, then it's going to geometrically hurt all the recovery, economically speaking, socially speaking, community speaking, for the entire cities, and not just for our particular cities, not just for the cities whose resources are extremely limited, but for everyone. And I don't think this pandemic showed that there was no city that was bulletproof, that was pandemic proof, that was resistance proof, because no matter how much resources you have and no matter how rich your city is, there's still not enough resources to serve all your citizens at the level that we want to serve them and at the level that they deserve to be citizens, and and collect the benefits of their contributions. So I can go on and give you guys examples of what we facilitated, but I think that it's all of us that work in local management have had the same thought, and we've done the best we've done in these times to still provide services, to still bring the water, to still collect the trash, to still help out families that are on social welfare, and still be able to provide for everything that is needed. But the mindset that we have, or the vision that we have as we come out of this, that is the one that should change ultimately, not just for local government, but in the way we treat our countries, we treat our cities, and we treat our mandates as politicians, but also as administrators, no matter where we're working for.
Thank you very much for these words. I think that the key word there is solidarity, and these equalization mechanisms that you've been putting in place to benefit the people who most needed support, and to tax those who are able to pay for these services. So thank you so much for these inputs. I would turn now to Aníbal. Aníbal, misma cuestión, misma pregunta. ¿Cuáles fueron los efectos, los mayores efectos de la pandemia en las finanzas a nivel de la provincia, de la gobernación de Antioquia? Aníbal.
Bueno, un saludo a todos y a todas. Un saludo muy especial a Emilia y a los organizadores, a los panelistas, a Paul, a Anuela y a Ivonne. Sí, en primer lugar, pues en Colombia, haciendo un recuento corto, rápido, en Colombia el impacto, por ejemplo, en pobreza, que es uno de los medidores más impactados por la pandemia, fue un aumento del 19% en pobreza y un aumento casi del 50% en pobreza extrema en los indicadores del país. En Antioquia, el golpe fue menor en el sentido de que fue más o menos la mitad de esos indicadores, pero de todas maneras cualquier cifra en ese sentido es muy grande. En el caso del departamento de Antioquia, los ingresos se disminuyeron en un 15%, y hay que hacer el análisis en Colombia, por lo menos. Me imagino que puede ser similar en algunos otros países, dependiendo de sus regímenes fiscales, de que el golpe a las finanzas fue más duro en las provincias, regiones, departamentos, como se quiera llamar, que en los propios municipios, debido a la fuente de los ingresos. La fuente de los ingresos en los gobiernos regionales en Colombia está ligada, por ejemplo, a los impuestos de licores, y eso se disminuyó fuertemente. Está ligada a los impuestos de las apuestas, y eso se disminuyó fuertemente. Las finanzas municipales están más ligadas a impuestos de propiedad, y esos disminuyeron en una forma menor. Pero el impacto de cualquier manera en rangos fue de una disminución de, por ejemplo, el 15% de ingresos en Antioquia, a disminuciones del 20, del 30% en otros departamentos, y así igualmente municipios. Es un impacto, como todos lo sabemos, devastador en cualquier municipio, departamento, país o globalmente. Medidas tomadas. Uno de los aspectos fundamentales, y por eso me parece tan importante que esta invitación esté en el marco de la preparación de la futura reunión de la coalición de Málaga, es el tema, obviamente, de las finanzas, en dos frentes fundamentales. Uno, los ingresos, ya sea municipales o regionales, y dos, el crédito. Es fundamental la estrategia de crédito para poder sobrepasar una dificultad local o global como la que estamos viviendo. En ese sentido, en forma responsable, pero con llevando al límite que fuera necesario, en Antioquia se aumentó un 10% el endeudamiento, y ese endeudamiento se focalizó y se está focalizando y se seguirá focalizando en las inversiones más generadoras de empleo. Y por eso programas especiales de vivienda, mejoramiento de vivienda sobre todo, para generar empleo y generar también bienestar en forma rápida. Mejoramiento de vivienda, techos, mejoramiento de vivienda, cocinas, mejoramiento de vivienda, pisos, inversiones en forma rápida también en el mantenimiento de vías en todo el departamento, y una inversión que genera impactos positivos en todos los frentes: el frente de cambio climático, pero también el frente de generación de empleo, reforestación. El otro frente en el que se ubicaron los créditos, que a su vez aumentó el departamento, fue en el otorgamiento de líneas de crédito para la pequeña, mediana y FAMI empresa. Esa fue la más impactada en el empleo, y es a su vez la que más positivamente impacta el empleo. Entonces, enfocamos aproximadamente $100 millones para préstamo para la pequeña, mediana y FAMI empresa urbana, y para los empresarios rurales, para los empresarios en el campo agrícola y agropecuario. Y el último frente de trabajo fue de los que quiero priorizar, el apoyo también con créditos especiales a más bajas tasas y a más largo plazo a los municipios. En Antioquia tenemos una especie de banco regional que se llama el IDEA, y con ese apoyamos a los 125 municipios de Antioquia para que a su vez pudieran aliviar ese golpe en las finanzas. Por último, ¿qué veo en el futuro? Quiero aquí compartir una propuesta que para algunos parecerá ambiciosa o demasiado ambiciosa, tal vez alocada, que he compartido con algunos de ustedes y con otros alrededor del mundo, y que me parece que la próxima reunión de Málaga puede abordarla en inmejorables condiciones, dado que de allí precisamente surgió el Fondo Internacional de Finanzas Municipales. Y es que se pensara en ese diseño global de las entidades multilaterales globales en un banco global de ciudades y regiones. Ese sí que sería una agenda ambiciosa para la reunión de Málaga. Y un banco global de ciudades y regiones para que precisamente apoye a las ciudades y a las regiones, teniendo a las ciudades y regiones como socios, teniendo a las ciudades y regiones como aportantes, pero teniendo, por supuesto, a entidades como Naciones Unidas y a entidades como el Banco Mundial también posiblemente como socios, para que se abordara no solo la posibilidad de financiación de los municipios y las regiones, sino el diseño de la relación entre regiones y ciudades, el diseño de la relación entre ciudades y áreas rurales, que creo, Emilia y amigos todos, debe ser la nueva tarea, porque la tarea de primer plazo ha sido responder al COVID-19. La tarea de segundo plazo en la que estamos y sobre la que hoy nos convocan es la de la reactivación económica y social. Pero la gran tarea que empezamos ya todos, tenemos que empezar a pensar y a diseñar es el nuevo orden, las nuevas relaciones entre lo urbano y lo rural, que pasan por el cambio climático, que pasan por la pospandemia, y que creo que en ese orden de ideas, una nueva institución y una nueva institucionalidad como un banco global de ciudades y regiones podría ser un nuevo actor importante en ese frente de lo local y lo regional, y de la preponderancia y de la importancia de lo local y lo regional en lo global. Bueno, un abrazo y gracias a todos.
Muchísimas gracias, Aníbal. Bueno, tenemos esto en la agenda, ¿no? Y ya lo conversamos incluso aquí en CGLU como una perspectiva, ¿no? para el futuro. We have not much time left for this first panel before entering into the second one. So I would like to give the floor again to our panelists, one after the other, starting with our colleague from Paris, Paul Simondon. Quelles sont, selon vous, quelles sont les revendications des villes aujourd'hui par rapport à la reprise? Donc, sans se projeter nécessairement dans le très long terme ou dans le long terme auquel nous invitait notre ami Aníbal Gaviria, mais là, dans l'immédiat, je dirais, les villes ont certainement un rôle à jouer dans la mise en œuvre des plans de relance. Quelles seraient les principales revendications, les principales propositions que vous feriez pour que cette application soit effective? Monsieur Simondon.
Bon, alors, d'abord, ce que je constate en écoutant les collègues, c'est qu'il y a sans doute quelque chose qui a été très perceptible pendant cette crise, c'est la rapidité, l'adaptation des territoires locaux, des gouvernements locaux, des villes, des régions, des États. Je donne quelques exemples. Pour ce que j'ai vu en France, et ce n'est pas spécifique à Paris, toutes les villes étaient dans la même situation, à la fois pour fournir des masques tout au début de la crise, puis pour mettre en place des centres de tests quand les tests ont été disponibles, puis enfin pour mettre en place la vaccination, des centres de vaccination. Il y avait bien sûr des politiques d'État, mais ceux qui étaient en avance, ceux qui mettaient en place au plus près, en connaissant les besoins, en connaissant les quartiers où les besoins étaient les plus importants, c'était bien les villes et les pouvoirs locaux. Et face à ça, par rapport au plan de relance, il y a dans l'Union européenne un plan de relance très important qui vient financer des plans nationaux. Et le constat, c'est qu'il n'y a aucun accès spécifique des villes à ce plan européen, et que selon les pays, ce n'est pas la même situation dans tous les pays de l'Union européenne, mais pour ce qui est de la France, il y a eu une minimisation de la situation des collectivités locales, des villes, des municipalités, et en particulier un oubli complet de ce qui est exceptionnel dans cette crise, c'est-à-dire que ce sont les villes métropoles, les grandes villes, et Paris au premier rang desquelles, qui étaient plus touchées par la structure de leur économie dans cette crise. Et nous avons un enjeu majeur pour redémarrer l'économie par l'investissement local, par l'investissement public des villes, des départements, des régions, des échelons locaux. Et pour l'instant, un plan de relance national qui n'a pas été élaboré, discuté avec les grandes villes, et qui, s'il vient aider un certain nombre d'acteurs privés à redémarrer, reste quand même très centralisé au niveau national dans sa conception, et ne vient pas du tout faire un effet de levier pour redémarrer l'investissement public le plus vite possible. Je vais donner juste un exemple pour laisser mes collègues parler. Il y a eu une transition phénoménale dont tout le monde n'est peut-être pas consciente à Paris, et j'espère que vous aurez l'occasion de venir voir. Il y a eu une révolution des transports en un an à Paris, avec une transition vers le vélo. Voilà, avec des installations de manière extrêmement rapide de pistes cyclables dans tous les quartiers de Paris pour éviter de surcharger les transports en commun et pour que tout le monde ne revienne pas en voiture individuelle après les périodes de confinement. Ça a été des chantiers qui ont été mis de manière très légère, très rapide par la ville. La plupart des grandes villes ont fait la même chose en France. Et pour l'instant, au niveau national, le soutien pour ce type de transition reste extrêmement centralisé, sans du tout dialogue avec les grandes villes et dans une communication très antérieure à la crise dans sa conception. Je pense que c'est un des exemples parmi d'autres, mais un exemple de l'absence de considération pour les villes, le rôle qu'elles doivent avoir dans la relance et dans la transition écologique de l'économie après cette crise sanitaire.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Mayor Ivan, same question. Have you been involved in the discussion with the national government? I mean, you told us that there were many problems, I mean, when dealing with the crisis. But now, I mean, looking forward, what would be your proposal from your city to fully implement a recovery at your level? Mayor Ivan.
Thanks. No, we haven't been fully engaged at all. And I listened to my colleague in Paris talking about how government's centralized policies can actually erode the excellent work that's already being done at city level. We're seeing that in different ways. One specific example I'd like to give in terms of how the cities will continue by virtue of the fact that we're closest to the people and we can never turn away. One of the things that is an example of how no matter what the central government does, we will end up picking up the pieces. So we have at national level a quarantine policy. Testing is done nationally. Decisions are made to contact trace and then quarantine. But for the last few months, the government has not been providing food to those in quarantine. This is something that we started doing as a city to supplement the government's efforts, but now they've stopped doing it and we're left, carrying a responsibility and providing food for people without even knowing the process through which they're identified as contacts. So this sort of mismatch, which is a different sort of take on the cycling angle or the cycling example that was given by Paris. Another area where we're seeing a re-centralization, which is important for the green element of the post-COVID response. I have said repeatedly that where you don't have the right to provide planning, land use planning and issue building permits, very, very bizarre, but that is our situation in Freetown. And sadly, it's the situation in many cities in sub-Saharan Africa, which is partly what leads to this sort of urban sprawl. When you don't have those rights, your ability to build back green is really, really limited. And we've seen a closing of that space as well. This is a very, very tragic occurrence when you look at one of the other impacts of the COVID crisis. I mentioned before the economic contraction. One of the things that COVID has done is affected raw commodities, including mining, and a number of mines have closed, which has pushed the rural-urban migration further, meant more people coming into the city. People coming to the city at a time when the city government has limited resources, and now it's very clear that the decentralization, the devolution of land use planning and building permits, which has been talked about, it's been enacted over 16, 17 years ago. And in the last 3 years, we've been repeatedly told there's going to be a roadmap for it. It's very clear now that that is not going to happen. So your ability to manage your city at a time when your population is growing, at a time when the fiscal space is reducing, in a post-COVID era, when there's a possibility of coming pandemics, it's quite an unfortunate mix. And as city leaders, we need to be able to articulate this. And again, I look at our conversations about how we open that fiscal space, how we build the partnerships, where is the funding coming from? None of these are actually going to work unless we're able to find a platform that effectively challenges and stops the re-centralization of functions, which we've seen across cities, across the world during COVID. Things, you face a crisis and all of a sudden, national governments want to step into the city space and start taking decisions for cities, which they're leaving out. There's a big gap between what the people actually need and what's being done, a waste of resources, and absolutely unacceptable in this post-COVID climate crisis time that we find ourselves in.
Thank you, Mayor. Anuela, was your experience the same in Tirana? I mean, these kind of recentralization was just said by Mayor Yvonne or even in Paris, or did you have, I mean, better relationship with the national government? And what, or looking forward, what are your proposal from the city government to better work with local government for an inclusive recovery?
To be fair, we have been having a great relationship with the central government throughout the crisis. Yes, central government has taken over a lot of issues or a lot of competencies and handled them. But on the other hand, the partnership became very obvious in terms of a lot of the issues that we in the local government had been pushing forward in terms of financing and access to credit and other issues, which otherwise would have never been on the front agendas or like on the top list of the agendas, now became very obvious. So that part, yes, there was a lot of help and there was a lot of coordination from central government, but it wasn't in terms of like removing independence or removing competences from the local. It was more of an added value, of an added assistance. And because us, especially coming out of yet another crisis right before the pandemic, where we had 2 major earthquakes and we were having a reconstruction effort in place, that synergy needed to be a lot more in sync with the addition of the pandemic. So what we've learned, however, and what it's here to stay, is definitely better access to finances for cities who are responsible with their finances and who can collect and who are solvable, instead of just putting all cities in one big pool where you have the good performance abiding to the same restrictions as the poor performance in terms of having access to finance for major infrastructure or major projects, which would never be sufficiently covered by the local collection of revenues in our cities. So that is here to stay. Out of this situation, we benefited from central government providing for the approval of a major investment financed by the European Bank of Investments because of the situation and because this access was granted and because this case became more appealing to the government, and they really understood the power of providing better services locally and giving us this freedom to do it. So we came out, I think, a little better off in terms of the relationship with the government and how that synergy of managing finances centrally and then locally was improved.
Thank you, Anuela. Aníbal, termino contigo. O sea, nos hiciste esta propuesta a muy largo plazo. Bueno, no sé si muy largo plazo, esperemos que no sea tan largo, de un banco global de ciudades y regiones, pero en el mediano plazo, digamos, ¿cómo ves la relación entre provincias, municipios y gobierno central para tratar de recuperarse, ¿no? de la crisis? ¿Hay propuestas también que puedes hacer desde este punto de vista?
Sí, coincido, por supuesto, bastante, plenamente con los comentarios que han hecho mis tres colegas panelistas. Desafortunadamente, yo creo que en buena parte del mundo lo que se ha visto es el aprovechamiento por bastantes gobiernos nacionales de las circunstancias y la crisis del COVID-19 para recentralizar o para profundizar procesos de centralización, lo cual va en mi concepto. He tenido el privilegio y el honor de ser gobernador, es decir, de una gobernación, de una provincia, de una región, y he tenido el privilegio también de ser alcalde. Y por eso me parece que la estructura de CGLU es tan equilibrada, tan inteligente y tan futurista, porque tiene en mi concepto las dos estructuras de gobierno más cercanas a los ciudadanos: el municipio, la ciudad y la región, que a su vez es la que apoya en primera instancia a los municipios más pequeños. Entonces, el primer aspecto en el que coincido y de alguna manera llamo la atención es que tenemos que seguir impulsando la descentralización, la autonomía y recuperar, ojalá, los espacios que se perdieron en la crisis de la pandemia y que desafortunadamente algunos gobiernos nacionales utilizaron para recentralizar o profundizar esa centralización. El segundo aspecto, en forma inmediata, aunque parezca muy obvio, seguramente será más importante en unos países o regiones. En el caso de Colombia lo es impresionantemente hoy, es avanzar en forma rápida en la vacunación. Aquí hemos acuñado una frase que es la vacuna es el gran impulso a la reactivación económica y social. Y por eso el departamento de Antioquia y el gobierno de Antioquia han ofrecido y han dado todo su respaldo al plan de vacunación de la nación, poniendo también recursos nuestros para acelerarlo. El otro aspecto específico es, estamos estudiando desde la gobernación de Antioquia una emisión de bonos para profundizar la capacidad del gobierno departamental de aumentar el gasto público en los rubros de emergencia y en los rubros de reactivación, sobre todo el empleo. Y el último punto es un trabajo mancomunado con los gobiernos departamentales en Colombia y que creo que debemos hacer a nivel global con CGLU para la diversificación de los ingresos municipales y regionales. Y sobre todo una diversificación de cara al nuevo orden global, de cara a las nuevas realidades globales. ¿Cuáles van a ser los ingresos futuros? ¿Cuáles son los ingresos del pasado con los que nos estamos quedando los municipios y los gobiernos regionales, que nos van a hacer unas finanzas famélicas hacia el futuro? ¿Y cuáles van a ser los verdaderos ingresos futuros sobre los cuales debemos fundamentar los ingresos futuros de las regiones y las ciudades?
Muchísimas gracias, Aníbal. I won't summarize the debate, but just heard, two or three things I would like to highlight. First, this risk of recentralization that everyone has, spoken about. I think it's a key risk, and cities have been fighting against this risk. This is something that we should take into account in our reflection for the future. The second thing is, I think, rethinking the structure of local taxes, as Aníbal said, rethinking who needs to pay, who doesn't need to pay so much, and rethinking the complex of the local taxes. What Preeti said in her introduction, this need to rebuild the local fiscal space, and with a new type of relationship with the state as well. Finally, I think that was raised also by some of the cities around the table, the ability to raise funds. And to raise funds from capital market, from financial market, from external aid. This is also key for many cities in the world, which is not maybe the case for all of them, but in many cases, the ability to access capital markets to be able to finance investment and to generate employment in the territories. I think this is also a key aspect. Well, this is, of course, only a few things that can be taken away from our discussion. I will maybe, Emilia, you want to say a word, or I'll give it to Mathilde for the second panel.
Happy to introduce the next
sure.
roundtable.
Go ahead. Thank you, Emilia.
Thank you very much for these very rich discussions indeed, and for this overview. I just wanted to recall, I think it's really interesting to see the challenge that all of these local and regional leaders have put in front of us, and I particularly would like to emphasize the need to create this platform that challenges decentralization. And I think somehow the Malaga coalition will also need to serve us in these advocacy efforts following the proposals from in particular Aníbal and the mayor of Freetown. I just also want to recall that for the first time in 3 decades, the Human Development Index has fallen. So since 1990, we had never seen Human Development Index decrease, and this is the case now. So that is one more reason to face these challenges seriously, and to take the responsibility as local and regional governments, but also as their networks. And that's a perfect, I think, introduction also for this roundtable that our colleague, the local finance officer in UCLG, Mathilde Penard, is going to be facilitating, because it is about the role of local and regional government associations and how to best rally and mobilize all actors, all spheres of government, but also all actors around development, around some of the challenges that have been described today. So good luck to you, Mathilde. We are in your hands. You have an impressive panel. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Emilia. Good morning, good afternoon to all. I am very pleased to moderate the second panel. After hearing the priorities and the voices of cities and regions, we will now explore the supporting role of local and regional government associations, both at national and at regional level. Just to say that throughout the year, we have seen how many local and regional associations have been key and have been very active on many different fronts in advocating on behalf of their members for additional financial support to help them cope with the emergency and its consequences. So I am very delighted to welcome our 3 panelists who will share the experience of their associations, and all of their associations have been very active on this issue. Mr. Sholile George, the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Local Government Association, SALGA, a very active member of UCLG. Mr. Clarence Anthony, the CEO and Executive Director of the US National League of Cities, also very familiar with the UCLG family because he has served as its founding treasurer in the past. So very pleased to have you here today. And finally, also Mr. Frédéric Vallier, who will provide a broader regional perspective on this issue, the Secretary General of the Council of European Municipalities and Regions, CMR. So we will have 3 moments of exchange, if we have time, obviously. I will ask each of the three panelists to provide input on 3 issues. First, what your association has done to support your members during this very challenging time. Second, how has your association engaged with others, meaning other tiers of government, but also other actors, to raise the priorities of your members and also to involve them in the definition and implementation of the recovery packages. And finally, a more forward-looking question to you on what worked and what didn't, and what are the action levers that you consider to be important as part of this advocacy work of your organization. And then we will open the floor for comments if we have time. So just without further ado, I will invite first Mr. Sholile George to address the first question. In a few words, what SALGA has done to support members in managing these financial constraints as a result of the pandemic. Please, you have 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and good afternoon, good morning to fellow panelists and also to the esteemed members of this webinar around the Malaga Coalition on Sustainable Finances. Well, in South Africa, similar to many other countries, we found local governments that they passed budgets already just before the start of the pandemic. Similar to many other countries in the sub-Saharan Africa, we passed our budgets in March, and then April, a state of disaster was declared. So we had to reprioritize the budgets and look at measures that must respond to the pandemic. And as a less developed country, the challenges of poverty and inequality were very stark. We have a number of people who are homeless, we have a number of people who have no water, a number of people who have no access to sanitation. So COVID pandemic imposed certain obligations that cities and local authorities have to respond to, meaning mandatory obligations to lock down people, provide all of these services. So municipalities have to repurpose their budgets. What we then did as SALGA was to profile the impact of the pandemic that our municipalities are facing, especially from major cities, secondary cities, and small towns, right across the typologies of our town. We went to Parliament to raise the profile of the impact of these two municipalities. And fortunately, we also sit at the highest table in the country. We are able to interact at a cabinet level to raise the issues that impact on local government. And as a result of our sustained advocacy, we were able to impact on 3 areas. Firstly, the repurposing of the grant system that exists in the country that is directed at local authorities. So we successfully pushed for repurposing of the grants so that expenditure on COVID can be allowed. The second part of our advocacy was on the disaster grant that needs to be promulgated in Parliament to direct resources to local government so that they can respond in terms of basic services, as well as all the personal protective clothing equipment that is required, and so on and so on. The impact is similar to many other speakers who spoke before. We saw dwindling of budgets of municipalities because of non-payment, as well as citizens unable to meet their day-to-day living. So you had to reprioritize those resources. We also advocated for a special grant to be directed to local authorities across the board. And we secured an amount of about $2 billion that the President of the Republic had to allocate to local government to make sure that they can respond to all these issues around COVID. But of course, similar to the previous speaker, the mayor of Freetown, the bottlenecks around red tape to access these funds impacted on the delays in many of our authorities. In the middle of disaster, municipalities are asked to produce business plans right in the middle. Not that we don't need business plan, but the elaborate nature in which they are required actually push municipal to about 6 months and so on. So we think there's a need for rethinking around those areas to make sure that local authorities can be assisted to improve and work much more better. The last part about how we responded, we also interacted with international bodies. For instance, UNDP partnership with ourselves as the association resulted in about more than 13 municipalities receiving PPE funding to assist them to access those. Also, as the association, we also persuaded our own employees to contribute personally into a solidarity fund that we established to make sure that the municipal workers and the hawkers in our towns can receive a much needed personal protective equipment as well as vouchers because of their realities. We also ensured that in the multi-level governance system we have in the country, we sit at the National Command Council that meets every week, that decides about measures that must be done. So we have that privilege of sitting there. We are also at the level of parliament to represent municipalities. At a federal level in our provinces, so we are present in multi-fora of decision support. So we're able to utilize that space to push for responses around those municipalities. The last part I would like to indicate is on the area of what needs to be done going forward in terms of municipalities. We think that part of the recovery phase should entail the rethinking of the national policies around financing for development, not only at a country level, but I think working collaboratively in our continents and as a global family of local governments, we need to push for this. At our domestic space, we're pushing for rethinking of the national finance model to direct more resources at local level so that the recovery phase can be grounded properly at a local level. The last part is around financing, especially for financial instruments for investments to be rethought to make sure that as we proceed towards the Malaga conference, we are able to say what are some of the financing instruments that can be done, building from the Addis Ababa accord that we had to make sure that local authorities globally receive a fair share of funding to drive the recovery phase in a sustainable way, including the green economy initiatives that are central to driving sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Actually, you have addressed all the issues, so I'm very glad that you managed to cover them all. But if you may, we will come back with you later on to address this issue of recovery packages and the role of the National Association in this. So now I'm just turning to Clarence Anthony. Please, the same question, what has NLC done throughout the past year to support your members, and with what results? Over to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I must say I miss my UCLG family, especially during this time. You know, no one could have expected what we all faced globally with the pandemic. And I can tell you that watching America respond initially was very challenging because our municipal leaders, our local governments, all indicated that they saw job loss. They saw 65% of their budget being impacted. 61% were canceling equipment purchasing. 24% of our cities was cutting economic development and job programs, and they were furloughing. In addition, I think one of the speakers already said, we have to still respond and provide services no matter what. And we saw our businesses. The biggest thing that we saw was interesting was the gap of people of color, especially Blacks in America. We saw where healthcare, whether it was diabetes and other impacts, we saw jobs where unemployment was higher for women and people of color in America. So NLC saw that, and what we had to do is create a response. And so we created a cities are essential response that we lobbied on behalf of every city, town, and village in America to get direct funding. We provided best practices. How do you respond to the issues of small businesses? How do you address the issues related to housing, affordability, quality, the increase in homelessness in America? So this cities are essential put a face on what the issues were in America in terms of the residents. And here are some ways that you can address it. Our cities were also devastated because the lack of governance structure. We have never had to transition 100% to virtual governance. And I will tell you that it's not funny, but some of the things was really entertaining with using the virtual systems that had to be put in place. But what did it do? It provided more access, more transparency, more engagement from the residents. And so as a national organization, we had to lobby, meaning advocate. We had to provide solutions, best practices, but we also had to be that organization that created this sense that we were going to be okay. We had to be able to say to our leaders, let's just get through this time. And so we engaged the national media, and we put together a Cities Are Essential campaign that told the stories about rebuilding, responding, resiliency. And I think now our local governments, as well as our national government, recognize that if cities recover, then America will recover. So that's what we did during this year and a half. And I will tell you, it has been professionally one of the most difficult times that I've ever experienced, because there was so much expectation of the National League of Cities that we were going to help America return to what it was before. And I can tell you, we're not returning to what we were before. We're going to be better. We're going to be more inclusive. We're going to be more responsive. And I think that our residents in America, cities, towns, and villages are going to be stronger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see many different, you have acted on many different fronts. You said lobbying, advocacy and campaigning, and also communication, and the important role of inspiring also as part of a national association. Now, jumping into more the regional perspective, I would like to ask Mr. Frédéric Vallier, do you have any experiences that are similar to the ones that have been presented earlier by Sholile George and Clarence Anthony? What has the CMR done to support its members, both national associations, but also cities and regions in Europe? Over to you. I think you are on mute.
Very sorry for that. Do you hear me? So let me start by saying that it's a pleasure to see Clarence and Sholile in this panel together with me. I think Joe Biden said America is back this weekend, Clarence. So I hope this means that America is also back in UCLG. That's very good to see you.
I can tell you miss me, Frederic.
Yeah, I miss you. Let me react also to what they said, because it's very similar. What we experienced in Europe was very similar. And I think there was first a shift on the consideration of jobs. Clarence was saying in America. In Europe, I think we discovered that what was considered as minor jobs were essential for society. I mean, and it's not only the health sector, but it's also, you know, the cleaning people, cashiers in grocery stores, providers of goods, drivers, lorry drivers, etc. I could name a lot of those jobs that are usually fulfilled by people from migrant backgrounds or even migrants themselves. And suddenly we discovered that society could not work without them. And of course, the public sector, like Emilia said, who became absolutely essential. So, but to come back to your question, what we did when the crisis started is we established right away a task force that brought together all the associations, first to share the experience that was going on in different parts of Europe and to allow national associations to guide their municipalities and regions on the ground on how to deal with online meetings, basic things like this, how to organize municipal councils online, how to reach out to the citizens, how the public services was maintained in different parts of Europe. And all this was very instrumental and amazingly attended for all the past year, with a lot of participation and exchange also of experience. And secondly, like the National League of Cities and SALGA, we were advocating in Europe for the recognition of local and regional governments. And the European Union, as you probably know, well, maybe not outside Europe, but decided on a recovery and resilience plan of something like 750 billion euros. And we succeeded in having recommendations to the nation states to involve the local and regional government in the design of the national recovery and resilience plans. This was, of course, a very big achievement for us. Unfortunately, it was not completely followed by the national states. And we did a study in last December to see how the local governments were involved in the designs of those plans, and the result was quite disappointing. But that helped us to go back to the European Commission saying, well, you see, you made a recommendation, but that recommendation was not really followed. Excuse me. And so we went back to them, and now the plans are being studied by the Commission, and hopefully there will be some more work with the national states to better involve local and regional governments in the implementation phase now. So this is very much what we did. And of course now what we are doing is assessing how all this went and how we could go forward. So we are in the preparation of a new publication that will be released at the end of this year, which is a publication that we do regularly about structures and competencies of local and regional governments in Europe, but with a specific focus this year on crisis resilience and crisis response. So that will help us see what impact the COVID-19 had on local finances, on local structures, on the way the public services are delivered at local and regional level. And it will also take a special light on health services, how health services are run at local and regional level, and what financial impact does it has on the budget of municipalities and regions. So that's basically what I can tell you at this point. But again, it's very similar to what I heard, with, of course, maybe a slight difference that is important, is that I think in most European countries, there was a big financial backing from social services, from the government. So we didn't have as much as in other regions, maybe, backlashes in unemployment and social issues. But we had some sectors that were particularly affected. I'm thinking of the cultural sector, for example, that municipalities have supported as much as they could. Tourism, of course, and that's shared with everyone.
Thank you very much for this contribution. I'm just reacting, listening to you, and also looking at the chat, because there has been an important contribution also on these recovery packages, but at the national level in Europe. Nicolas Garbi, I don't know if you want to provide an answer to this, or if you want to take the floor to share what you've said in the chat. Because I think it's really great to also see what is being done at the national level in Europe regarding these recovery plans that you're describing. I don't know if you're still in the room, Nicolas Garbi. If not, we will just open the floor for reactions, because all the speakers have touched upon many of the issues that we wanted to deal with. I don't know if we have any comments, reactions. Perhaps also, Sholile George, if you want to provide a few more response and a few more details on the involvement of SALGA in these recovery plans adopted at the national level. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, facilitator. I would like to make additions on two issues. My fellow panelist, Clarence, reminded me of the depth of the crisis that we have. Because when all is said and done, it is at the local authority level that we see the amplification of poverty and inequality. So as local authorities in our country, we have a pro-poor policy where we assist indigent members of the community through a basket of social services. They will get a certain portion of free electricity, free water, free refuse removal, and so on. Now, what COVID has done is putting us in a conundrum. Revenue of municipalities has drastically declined. The economic performance of the country has severely been impacted. But more worse is that the rise in unemployment, because industry is now shedding jobs right across, and commerce and so on. So many people are now offloaded to local authorities. So it means there is now a huge burden to the local fiscus to carry out the social consequences of the pandemic. So we are working hard as SALGA to profile this work in South Africa, going through municipalities to cast a spotlight about what the impact it is. Some of the local authorities had to even take extra measures to cushion the impact. For instance, they will delay repayment of municipal accounts. They would offer more rate rebates in terms of servicing. So at least the poor can be protected, even the unemployed who will find themselves on the streets, but it's at a cost to the local fiscus. So we think that there has to be a fundamental rethink on the vertical allocation of resources, on the vertical distribution of responsibilities, because local government, no doubt, is now carrying a disproportionate share of the social impact and consequences of that. So as a global family, we would have to look at how we can push for greater fiscal resources to be directed at local authorities, even if there are grants that are more conditional to protect expenditure, because in our own case, for instance, the issues of the unfortunate social evil of corruption has also occupied the greater space. So in the midst of fighting a pandemic, responding to the poor, there are some amongst us as society who will show the greatest disregard for the impact of this and stealing the money and misdirecting the funds, misappropriating them. We have had a fair share of that in many of those areas. So we've got to find ways of influencing the rethinking of the fiscal model, but also a much more greater regime for decentralization of decision-making powers to local authorities. So if Mayor of Freetown says, we've been fighting for 17 years for approval of development plans, it may be an acute issue there with us in South Africa because we derive greater powers and autonomy as local authorities right from our constitutional structure. So we are relatively privileged in that regard. We don't have to fight for some of those areas. But I think it offers a platform for us to push for a global rethink of the key enablers to local authorities to be able to be agile and be the key growth points for the recovery phase that we need across all our countries and regions. And I think as local associations, we must push very hard for rethinking of some of these models and also to get greater collaboration by local authorities on a cross-collaboration basis to make sure that some of the movements that will happen from people living city A to city B, we don't become importers and exporters of those, but we work much more collaboratively to push back the frontiers that would make our cities less attractive, at the same time, remove regulatory burden that would impede the ability to have green shoots of growth that are necessary to have balanced and more just economic development and social order in our countries.
Thank you very much. Indeed, the issue of accountability, but also flexibility and autonomy of local and regional government revenue is critical. I will just give the floor to Emilia Saiz and then to Clarence Anthony, who is back and wanted to react also on the conversation. Please, Emilia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matilda. I actually had a question both for Clarence and Frederic, because Cholile has already addressed part of it, I think. I was wondering whether, I mean, it is very clear that the strong role that national local government associations have played in the advocacy for inclusion of local governments in recovery plans. I mean, it was very clear, Clarence, in your congressional conference. I mean, you had the highest level of the federal government attending, and I think you have been in a continuous interlocution. This has been the case in Europe as well, but now my question is whether do we identify structural mechanisms for dialogue around the use of the recovery funds? Where do we stand for that? And also in particular in the case of Europe, for the big bulk of European funding that is coming, where our members are quite critical about the role that they have been given. So I would hope that they can address some of that, and I think Nicholas from Madrid is going to address part of that as well in the strategy that he was sharing in the chat. Thank you, Matilde.
Thank you. So Clarence Anthony, if you want to react to this comment, and perhaps also afterwards, Frédéric Vallier to answer also this point on the governance, which I think is important. And then we will go to Nicolas Garbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General. That is an important question that we had to ask ourselves. You know, again, what is our role and how do we get the direct dollars to every city, town, and village in America? And we were able to do that with the Biden administration. For the first time in the history of any piece of legislation, every city, town, and village received money. So we were meeting with Congress, we met with the administration, Department of Treasury, and we showed them the fiscal impact, the loss of jobs, the loss of economic development, the loss of infrastructure investment, the homeless numbers. I mean, it was a bleak picture. And so we advocated. And so what now is happening is the Department of Treasury is providing funds, direct dollars, to all cities over 50,000 population. And in America, that is a medium-sized city. Anywhere else, it would be a small village or town. And what the big issue has been is making sure, as George has said, making sure that the mechanism of how you spend those dollars are in place. So we're providing training, technical assistance to small communities so that they in fact know how to distribute those dollars in an equitable, inclusive manner. So as I talked earlier about the gaps that existed that we found, especially in the poor, in the Black community, women, and other communities, we're making sure that those dollars are being spent to address those issues. And I think that that is what we must do as a national association. I am hopeful that this formula, Amelia, will be used again because it's the only way that we're going to recover and rebuild our nation if we get that money in the hands of local authorities. Now, I will tell you already, we are seeing where some politics are being played, that they're trying to claw back or take back some of those dollars. In the National League of Cities, we're going to continue to fight, and we're going to fight for our members. It hasn't been easy, and I will tell you, the American Rescue Plan has been a saving grace for many of our cities, towns, and villages. Pedri?
Thank you for this important contribution, which I'm sure will inspire also other associations present today in the room. Frédéric Vallier, a few words on this issue of the use of recovery funds. Over to you. I think you're on mute.
Pardon.
Bon.
Je disais que j'allais parler en français pour stimuler la diversité linguistique de cette organisation. Non, d'abord, il faut comprendre une chose, c'est que l'Europe, contrairement aux États-Unis d'Amérique, n'est pas un État fédéral, mais c'est une union d'États indépendants. Et donc, les plans sont des plans nationaux, même si l'Europe, pour la première fois, et c'est très important, a décidé d'investir elle-même et d'aller sur les marchés financiers, en tout cas de créer un fonds sur lequel l'ensemble des États européens seront responsables et le garantiront, et il sera distribué, il est distribué aux États nationaux. Et c'est au niveau national que s'organise la gestion de chaque plan de relance et de résilience. Alors, nous, évidemment, nous appelons à ce qu'il y ait un suivi de ce plan de relance. Au niveau européen, nous avons mis en place, comme je le disais, des procédures pour pouvoir suivre comment ça se passe dans les différents États et pouvoir appuyer nos argumentations vis-à-vis de la Commission européenne sur cette étude permanente. Donc, on va continuer à faire ce monitoring pour alerter la Commission lorsque nous serons nous-mêmes alertés par nos membres de situations que nous jugeons inadmissibles. Mais ce que nous souhaitons, c'est qu'effectivement, à l'intérieur de chaque État, les associations nationales soient consultées et qu'il puisse y avoir un instrument de concertation et de suivi de la mise en place de ces plans de relance. Mais au-delà de ça, moi je crois que ce qui est très important aussi, et c'est quelque chose sur lequel nous insistons beaucoup, c'est que ces plans de relance doivent être non pas une manière de revenir à l'histoire d'avant, mais de s'engager dans une autre voie, et c'est en lien évidemment avec les autres programmes de l'Union européenne, que sont le Green Deal et l'engagement vers la transition énergétique. Et donc ce plan de relance, il doit servir de levier pour donner aux territoires la force et la capacité de changer leur modèle de développement pour répondre aux objectifs qui ont été fixés d'une Europe complètement décarbonée en 2050 et d'une Europe plus juste socialement et territorialement. C'est-à-dire qu'on va s'appuyer aussi sur les objectifs du développement durable pour mettre en place des politiques qui mènent à l'activation de ces objectifs et à je ne sais plus parler français, à la manière de construire des politiques publiques qui répondent à ces enjeux-là. Donc c'est ça pour nous l'enjeu principal, mais on a conscience des limites de l'exercice parce que malheureusement les États ont encore la main sur beaucoup des décisions qui sont prises et la décentralisation. Bon, je ne vais pas répéter ce qu'ont dit les collègues, mais il y a eu une forme de recentralisation au début de la crise. Ça s'est amélioré un peu dans la deuxième phase de la crise, mais il faut évidemment être très vigilant et il faut absolument que les États comprennent que ce sont les territoires qui vont pouvoir permettre la relance et qui vont permettre justement de sortir de cette crise, et tous les territoires. C'est-à-dire que il ne faut pas mettre en concurrence les métropoles avec les territoires périurbains ou les territoires ruraux ou les villes intermédiaires. Je crois que la bonne relance pour l'Europe, c'est d'assurer que tous les territoires soient en capacité d'offrir une transition énergétique, une transition digitale, c'est très important puisqu'on est encore très en retard en Europe par rapport à d'autres régions, l'accès au digital, l'accès à l'information, l'accès aux services publics. On a dit tout à l'heure combien les services publics avaient été instrumental dans cette crise. Donc redéfinir tout ça. Vous savez, il y a la maire de Paris parle de la ville du quart d'heure quand elle explique que les services doivent être, que ce soit les services culturels ou autres, accessibles en un quart d'heure à pied dans la ville. Eh ben, je crois que ce concept-là, il peut aussi se développer au niveau européen et au niveau des États pour que peut-être ce soit la vie de la demi-heure, je ne sais pas comment il faudrait l'appeler, mais qu'on puisse trouver des services publics essentiels à moins d'une demi-heure en voiture ou à vélo ou à pied de là où on réside. Donc il y a tout un champ à explorer. Beaucoup de choses à mettre en place, mais on espère qu'on pourra faire la conjugaison de tout cela pour créer une société qui soit différente, mais qui soit plus respectueuse à la fois de l'environnement et des citoyens. Et il y a un élément qui est important, c'est que l'Union européenne a lancé le mois dernier une procédure qui s'appelle la conférence sur le futur de l'Europe, qui va redéfinir ou qui va permettre aux citoyens de s'exprimer sur ce qu'ils attendent de l'Union européenne. Et nous, on va s'engager dedans en proposant des dialogues territoriaux qui permettent aux citoyens d'exprimer leurs envies. On va faire la synthèse de tout ça et ça va être l'objet d'un rapport que nous remettrons aux institutions européennes, aux États membres, pour redessiner finalement ce que pourrait être l'Europe dans les années qui viennent, avec pour objectif de contribuer à mettre tous ces aspects-là en musique pour les années à venir.
Thank you very much. The issue indeed of the ability of local and regional governments to enter in dialogue with the national government will be critical in the use of these funds. And I'm mindful of the time because it's almost the end of the meeting. So I will just leave the floor to Nicolas Garbi to explain a bit what you were saying in the chat, because I think it's really relevant for this discussion. And then I will get the floor back to Emilia for the wrap-up and closure of this meeting. Thank you.
Merci Mathilde. Combien de minutes j'ai à disposition pour savoir? 2 minutes, 3 minutes?
Yeah, if you can be brief.
Okay, I will try to go very complex. Merci, je vais continuer en français aussi. Je suis tout à fait en suivant Frédéric, un peu de diversité. Alors, il faut dire la chose suivante. Au niveau européen, il y a 2 négociations en cours. Les 2 négociations sont une sur le Next Generation EU et finalement, il y a le budget pluriannuel européen qui, pour quelques raisons, se trouve être négocié au même moment où on justement négocie le Next Generation EU, donc le paquet de recovery. Et donc, il y a 2 négociations et ce qui est très intéressant, c'est que les 2 processus de négociation ne sont pas coordonnés au niveau de Bruxelles et au niveau des capitales européennes. Et donc, vous pouvez aussi imaginer quelle peut être la coordination dans le dialogue avec les gouvernements locaux. Ça, c'est un premier point. Deuxième point, les 2 processus de négociation suivent des règles différentes. Donc, si dans le cadre du budget pluriannuel européen, il y a des règles qui, normalement, doivent garantir la participation des gouvernements locaux, notamment le Partnership Principle, qui souvent n'est pas vraiment respecté. Mais bon, c'est un principe légal qui est mis en place pour définir les budgets. Dans le cas du Next Generation EU, le contrôle de ce principe et son application était encore plus faible. Donc là, on passe à un deuxième niveau. On a la capacité à travers le CMR, à travers le comité des régions, qui est un organe consultif au sein de l'Union pour les gouvernements locaux. On a eu l'espace pour pouvoir défendre nos positions, nos intérêts, notamment le fait que c'était pas qu'on ne sert pas simplement pour faire de la dépense, mais aussi on aimerait bien pouvoir faire partie du processus de décision, de dessin des politiques publiques. Cela dit, on a écouté, mais disons nos points ne sont pas toujours intégrés. Et donc finalement, comme disait Frédéric, on retourne au niveau de l'État, et au niveau de l'État, c'est, comme disait Emilia, les réseaux de villes, et en tout cas les réseaux qui représentent les gouvernements locaux, qui sont les interlocuteurs principaux. Alors ça, c'est quelque chose de très positif quand les réseaux marchent, mais c'est pas toujours le cas. Donc, il y a un point important de représentation, de capacité de dialogue entre gouvernements locaux et nationaux si les réseaux nationaux ne fonctionnent pas très bien. Donc, finalement, à Madrid, qu'est-ce qu'on a fait? L'État a une capacité de dépense, par exemple, sur le budget européen de 14-20, donc sur le budget pluriannuel précédent, de 36%. Donc, à 2021, ils ont pu dépenser à niveau de tout l'État que le 36% de tout le budget qui avait été donné pour les 8 années précédentes. Alors nous, ce qu'on a porté, c'est un plan dans lequel on démontre qu'on a des projets qui sont déjà viable, déjà financiable, bankable, comme ils disent, qu'on a aussi une capacité de travailler avec le secteur privé, parce que on sait bien, comme la Commission nous pousse à faire, qu'on doit mettre du budget public avec du budget privé, à travers aussi le dessin d'instruments financiers, etc. Et donc, l'idée, c'est proposer un plan concret avec des lignes stratégiques qui sont complètement en ligne avec l'Union européenne et les lignes stratégiques du pays, et aussi démontrant qu'on a une capacité, oui, de dépense. Donc, finalement, c'est une dialectique propositive dans laquelle on porte une contribution à l'État pour qu'il soit aussi capable, lui, de dépenser l'argent qui arrive de l'Europe.
Thank you very much for this acceleration on what you said in the chat. I will just check if we have any other comments and requests to take the floor. I see no hands raised. And so I think I will just give the floor back to Emilia to guide you through the next segment. Thank you very much to all speakers And I hope we will receive additional information and additional resources of your involvement as associations in the definition to really advocate for the inclusion of your members in the definition and implementation of these recovery packages. Thank you very much, and over to you, Emilia.
Thank you very much, Mathilde. Good job in this very, very interesting panel. There is never enough time. We could keep talking about this for a very long time, but we can't, and there will be other opportunities. So my task now is just guide us through the closing remarks, and for that I am very, very happy to have with us Jean-François Sebot, the Executive Director of our global fund for the development of cities. Jean-François, I don't think that we have heard many new things, but we have heard them framed in a very concrete context, right? And this should make it easier for us to actually advocate and discuss and fight for the creation of new mechanisms with international funders and donors. What is your impression of today, Jean-François, and what would be the next steps according to you?
Yeah, thank you very much, Emilia. It was a very, very interesting discussion of the two sessions. Like you said, I think what we've heard just comforted what we knew already. And I think on the first session, I got three main points from what the cities and political representative said. Beyond that, we have to see that they had to adapt very quickly on the budget allocation. And we know that this is very challenging. And I think the fact that most of the cities were successful and they had to do it was already very positive. But the three main points of this first session was one, the risk of re-centralization, where governments have re-centralized in some ways the way of managing municipal finance. I think this is critical, and we need to again see how to work on that. Secondly, the need expressed to rethink the structure of the local taxes and revenues to rebuild the local fiscal space. We've talked a lot of that with the UNCDF and David, and I think it was again raised, and we need to pay attention to that. And the last point on this first session was also more globally the need to reshape the local finance architecture to build that better, whether it's to create a new instrument or to access to new resources like debt and capital markets, and to develop new partnerships to better finance and invest in local development. On the second session, I really also appreciate the fact that there were key main messages that came from the US, Europe, and South Africa. With one, the role of the National and Regional Association was one, to advocate and support, including the secondary cities, to push for rapid response for local development, but also to acknowledge the role of local government. The second was to provide policy support, to reshape and rethink the financial models and investment to be rethinked, like the strategic dialogues, the trainings that Clarence was mentioning, the case studies, and the peer-to-peer exchange. And the last point was also to play the role of catalyzers of partnerships. From South Africa, we heard that there were connections between cities and UNDP, a solidarity fund was involved, and I think NLC also mobilized some philanthropics and financial support. So really these three roles of regional and national association are very critical. We knew that, but we know that now within the COVID crisis, they played a critical role that helped also local governments to answer that. So just to finish, I think we can be confident that the Malaga coalition will be very dynamic around these different approach, and I'm looking forward for the next steps of these mechanisms. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jean-François. It's also worth mentioning that we are looking at what we need to adapt in our advocacy strategy in calling for these changes of mechanisms. I know that Barbara Samuels, our Ubuntu advisor has been commissioned to help us with this, is also with us. I saw Paul Smoke also that has been working with us, has been following this session. I think we have a lot of material and many good pieces to put this puzzle together. What concerns me now, and I am going to you, David, now for your comments and your sense of this session is, I don't think that even we, as constituency of local and regional governments, are putting very concretely local service provision financing in the right space. And one of the things that we have seen in the research that we have done with the emergency governance initiative. We have seen that the red tape that we have is not only around the mobilization of funds, but about how to spend the funds. How can you actually spend funds? What type of service provision are you allowed to shape? And I think this will need to play a little bit of a bigger role in the discussions that we have been having about financing and constructing a new fiscal environment, which has been our mantra, right, for the past years. So I don't know, David, where you are positioned and what opportunities you see for the Malaga coalition. Clearly, everybody is still calling for this famous big bank. To a certain extent, FMDB was our version of a possible bank. We have now an investment fund that we are developing all together. What else? What else do we need to think about? Floor is yours, David.
Well, thank you so much indeed, Emilia. No, very interesting discussion. So just a couple of feedbacks, perhaps just at the end, and then where we can go from here. So it's clear, of course, that local governments need a seat at the table, and that can help to refine the answer to what you're talking about, Emilia. And we heard that from Hulili, for example, how they have that in South Africa, now in the US as well. So, but to your main point, Emilia, I think what we hear is a challenge to the financing for development paradigm. The public sector is back, as you quite lucidly outlined at the beginning, and then was expressed by many others. And the relationship between the public and the private, and social services and private activity, that is clearly back on the agenda in a way which perhaps hasn't been for quite a while. And also we are seeing, even at the UN now, some of this talk about infrastructure finance, about the way to look again at the financing for development paradigm, so that it can actually enable infrastructure finance and local infrastructure finance. It's a little bit skewed towards the short-term financing currently. So I think one big takeaway is, that is on the table again, and we need to look again at it to cover certain elements. It's not about rebuilding local fiscal space. I think that is clear. It's about reshaping local fiscal space, because the pandemic, together with changes in taxation, together with the digitalization, the Airbnb, the Uber, the Amazonization of the economy, has altered the way in which local governments can raise resources. Some very interesting comments came out. Somebody said that those who are actually more free were hit more than those who depend on intergovernmental fiscal transfers. Very interesting comments came out. So I think it's reshaping, remaking local fiscal space in the context of a reviewing of the multi-level of governments and how services are delivered. That has to be a key element. In terms of capital financing, it's clear, big bank, I really hear you, Annabelle, and I think that's something it's dear to my heart, and it's something we can really look at and work on together. But I believe also what the architecture doesn't have right now is a kind of global non-sovereign guarantee mechanism, so that that enables this lower cost of capital over the long term. I continually remember what the mayor of Quito told me, that when he tried to build a subway system, initially he could only get a 15-year loan. And yet, as Paul Collier tells us, the University of Oxford has just offered a 100-year bond at 2%. So they can do that because they're the University of Oxford. So they can issue a bond 100 years, 2%. I mean, and Quito for a subway system, 15 years at 12%. It doesn't make sense. So we need some kind of feature in the architecture to guarantee cities that want to do that type of thing. So that doesn't go on to the sovereign liability, the sovereign credit rating. And that's the kind of thing I think the Malaga Coalition can start to work towards. And we maybe need to take a look again at paragraph 34 of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. That's the paragraph that talks about local government finance. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, but you don't hear it talked about very often when Addis is spoken about. We've got to put that back on the table. That was a very prescient paragraph. And I remember the government of Benin really pushed a lot of effort to get that down there. And so the next steps, finally, where do we go from here? I think there's a lot we heard today that was new. We will refine the policy note that UCLG, FMDV, and UNCDF issued earlier, which is kind of like a draft policy note, towards a second PrepCom in the fall, where we will invite perhaps some thinkers from the finance world, both national government and the Bretton Woods institutions and development banks and the private sector too. And then that'll be a second preparatory meeting. And hopefully then we can have in Malaga physically, please God, physically a meeting where we can really define towards a little bit what Annabelle was talking about in terms of, what can we collectively advocate for as a strong coalition globally that will change, a game changer, that will change the way in which the financial ecosystem works for cities and local governments. But I agree, Amelia, it's very different than it was a couple of years ago, but we've also made a lot of ground. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Amelia. And those would be the comments that I would add in response to what you have said.
Well, thank you very much, colleagues. I don't think that at this point there is so much more that we can add. I think we have quite a good, clear direction towards the Malaga coalition. I too really hope it will be in person, but I am also looking forward to probably still a virtual preparatory meeting somewhere in the second part of the year as we come back from the holidays. Let us process all this information that we have exchanged. I want to congratulate the teams for the variety of the cases that we have heard about today. It is inspiring to see how, despite the diversity, you have many things in common, and I think that will be the strength also of the Malaga coalition. Many of the things that we need to push for will be relevant both for the global north and the global south. I am totally convinced, and with the commitment to rethink, reshape the fiscal space, also work on autonomy, and above all, also advocate for more funding to be directed to cities and local service provision. I wish you all a very good end of the day, however long it still is in the different parts of the world. Take good care of yourselves. I hope the vaccine is coming up soon for all of you. Thank you very much, dear colleagues, UCLG team, FNDB, and UNCDF. Thank you all. Bye-bye. Talk soon again, I'm sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.
See you. Take good care.